Welcome. We are so happy to have everyone here with us today. Então, sejam todos bem-vindos. Estamos super felizes de todos vocês terem se unido a nós hoje para mais um in.MIND Talk. E hoje, na nossa série do in.MIND, sempre pensando nos pilares da nossa escola, da Escola Concept, sempre focando em ou sustentabilidade, ou fluência digital, ou empreendedorismo, ou colaboração, trazemos o nosso expert em Mindfulness, que trabalha junto ao Mind Up Institute, coordenando toda a região sul dos Estados Unidos, dentro desse trabalho de Mindfulness que é tão significativo hoje em nosso mundo. Com foco no nosso pilar da colaboração, o Dido Balla, diretamente dos Estados Unidos, da Flórida, se junta à nossa comunidade da Escola Concept para compartilhar um pouquinho sobre o que significa mindfulness nesses tempos de Covid. O que significa mindfulness nesses tempos de transição, de incerteza? E como que a gente consegue trabalhar o mindfulness dentro dos nossos do nosso dia a dia, dentro das nossas rotinas e dentro das nossas vidas de uma forma muito significativa. A conversa que o Dido vai ter com a gente hoje vai se seguir em inglês. Então, agora eu vou trocar de língua e vou passar para o nosso convidado. So, Dido, thank you so much for joining us. We are extremely happy and forever grateful for this opportunity of having this conversation with you today. And since you're the expert, I don't think I have to say anything else, but just kind of pass it over to you and allow you to represent the pillar of collaboration in our school that I'm sure you can do really well representing on this day. So thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. And it is going to be a conversation. So I'm going to start by sharing some thoughts that I've been thinking about. And at the end of it, we're going to have an exchange with the audience and hopefully grow from that conversation. So I'm going to start us off, but ultimately it's going to be an exchange. It's me and everybody who's watching right now. We're going to make it happen together. All right. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to talk about this because as somebody who has spent years reflecting on how mindfulness can change people's lives, the situation that happened a few months ago with us having to stay at home hit me first and personally and then professionally. So I'm looking forward to sharing the thoughts that I came up with. And that's why we're here today talking about mindfulness and virtual learning. So this slide represents a routine that has become very familiar in my life. And I wonder if it makes sense to everybody else who's watching. So look at those images and think about that cycle. So for me, typically when the sun is shining and everything is going well according to plans, I have a really good routine that keeps me healthy. So it's a routine that involves what I eat, how much I sleep, how much I exercise, etc. And that plays a big role into how productive I am. Now, when everything is great, the routines make perfect sense. But what's interesting is that as soon as I have a bad day, or I feel a little off, I feel a little sick, a little tired, or it's raining, for some strange reason, even though I'm aware that the healthy routines that keep me going during regular times would help me when I feel down, my brain gets confused and starts wondering, what should I do? Should I continue with the regular, usual mindful routines? Or should I look on the other side and perhaps see what's out there? And typically what happens to me, at least, is I want dessert. Dessert for me typically is, if I can get it, I would want some sort of brownies and ice cream on it. But that's why I put a cupcake there. And what's interesting about this is that I do this even though I'm very aware that the next day or the next couple hours, my stomach is going to be in pain. So I make the decision that because things don't seem to be going as well as usual, I kind of want to try something. And the thing that I typically try, even though I'm aware of it, that is going to hurt me, does hurt me. And then I go through the pain of being like, why did I do this? Until I'm back to the routine. And I'm sharing that because I wonder, one, if it makes sense to other people. And two, this is the cycle and the routine that sent me off on the journey, wondering why is it that the same me that made the plans to eat healthy is the same me that gives in, and when things aren't great, giving to the cupcake and the ice cream. I don't know why, but I have a few thoughts about why that might happen, and that's what I want to talk about today. So the foundation of all this is mindfulness, but I think it has to start with defining mindfulness. I have read so many articles, have watched so many videos, and have talked to so many people about mindfulness that I've heard so many definitions, and some are incomplete. So I want to offer a simple but complete definition of mindfulness. So mindfulness is two things, if you want to keep it simple. The first thing, which most of you guys are familiar with, is it is being here and now, being in the present moment. I'm going to dig a little deeper into what that means. But the second tenet of mindfulness is non-judgment. And I'm going to explain what that means again. So let's get back to the first one. What does it mean to be present here and now? When you think about mindfulness, most of you might imagine somebody who's meditating with their eyes closed, perhaps their legs crossed. And yes, that's an idea of what mindfulness is. And it still belongs to the idea of being here and now, because somebody who's doing that, just like the little drawing on the slide, is somebody who's trying to forget about what's happening around and just be here in the moment. Now, thinking about being here and now, remember though that you don't have to sit with your legs crossed and close your eyes and meditate in order to be mindful, or at least when it comes to being here. Anytime you attempt to be here and now, meaning that somebody is talking to you and you attempt to listen to them mindfully and actually pay attention to what they're saying, as opposed to thinking about how you're going to respond, you're being mindful. That's you being here and now. Every time you have a task at hand and you decide, even though I'm thinking about other things, I'm going to attempt to be here and now, that's mindfulness. And an example I like to share is, at least it happens to me, when I'm driving my car and I'm going somewhere unfamiliar and I have music playing, the closest I get to my location, my destination, and the more unsure I am about where I'm going, I often end up turning the volume down for my car so I can see better. And that's an interesting situation because I don't need my ears to see. However, my biology, my brain is reminding me that being here and now is important, AKA if I want to look for directions and focus on that, it's better to stop with the music. And I hope it sounds familiar to you guys as well. So that's being here and now. But the non-judgment tenet has to be added to the being here and now. And let me tell you why. If you sit still for 30 seconds or a minute and actually pay attention to what's happening here now, AKA not just physically, but also in your mind, it is very possible that you're not going to be happy or proud of the things on your mind. And it goes from something super simple like, okay, if I want to focus on breathing, and I notice that I'm thinking about my to-do list, I'm thinking about the projects that I have going on, I'm thinking about dinner. If I'm not non-judgmental, I'm going to start thinking, well, why am I thinking about these things? I should be focusing on breathing right now. Why am I thinking about a to-do list? And the more you do that, you're judging yourself, the less mindful you actually are. So the non-judgment component has to coexist with the here and now, because once you are aware of those thoughts, then you tell yourself, I am just going to notice those thoughts. I notice them and then let them go and try to come back to what I'm trying to focus on. That's mindfulness. It is here and now, and it is non-judgmental. I talked about the non-judgment towards yourself and your own thoughts. That's not the only thing though. You also have to be non-judgmental towards others, right? So that means that typically if you sit with people and as a group, you want to be mindful. And your way of being mindful involves closing your eyes and being calm and focusing on breathing. And yet the person next to you, for example, wants to be mindful in a way where they are standing up. Perhaps they are crossing their arms like this. It is perfectly fine because there's a long spectrum and we're all different. If that's the way it works for them, it has to be okay for them and for you. So those two tenets are the ones that I have to hammer, because if we only think about mindfulness as being here and now, and we don't add the non-judgment, it's a lot more difficult to really understand how powerful mindfulness is. So thinking about mindfulness and routines and going back to my cycle with the perfect routine and then the doubt and then the cupcake and the stomach ache and then back, before COVID, a lot of us who have attempted to have a mindfulness practice were doing okay, right? Because we had our routine. I know I was certainly doing okay. I knew exactly what most of my days looked like when I would get up in the morning, when I'm working out, and I had a routine that allowed me to thrive, especially when it comes to mindfulness. And I know many teachers too who had a mindfulness practice in their classrooms. So they already knew on Monday, let's say Monday is Mindful Monday, when the kids get to class, we start by sharing some positive thoughts about the day before, and then we get into a brain break, and then we start the lesson. For example, it was working. And that's why you have the slide with your brain healthy and happy. But then something happened with COVID, right? It hit us in different ways. The way it personally hit me is in this way. I'm somebody who has worked extremely hard to curate my life for positivity. I'm aware of our negativity bias, so I know that if I spend a lot of time watching the news or on social media, typically, if it bleeds, it leads, that means that I'm going to go towards and gravitate towards the negative news. And that's not good for my brain. Since I know that, I have worked extremely hard to actually eliminate the sensationalized news that's negative, that is trying to get my brain's attention, and all the pages on my social media that are always going for that headline that's negative, they're all deleted. That means that typically when I scroll down my social media, it's actually rather positive. But then when COVID happened, something changed in my routine before I even thought about it. Now, I live in Florida. I have friends and families in many different states around the country. So I was thinking, okay, what's happening in Seattle? What's happening in Texas? What's happening in Maryland? And then I had to think about my family overseas. What's happening in Birmingham, where my sister is? What's happening in Paris, where my little sister is? And what's happening in Cameroon, back home? And what makes this even more interesting is that at the time, I was supposed to travel to France for my sister's graduation and then go back home to see my parents. So when everything stopped, I started obsessing with the news. So I would get on my phone, on the computer, watch TV, refreshing the page from Johns Hopkins with the data, with the stats. How many numbers do we have? How many cases? What's happening with traveling? Can people go out of the country? What's up with the airlines? And I did not realize that since my brain was no longer used to that, doing that for 3 days straight captured my brain in a way that I was not ready for. So about a week into being home, I had a little kind of anxiety attack where I struggled with breathing. And thankfully, as somebody who works in mindfulness, I had the tools to take care of that anxiety, and I did. But then I wondered, if that happened to me, what about the kids who are now at home? Because it's one thing to have kids in the classroom where everything is kind of organized. The adult, the teacher makes sure that you do mindfulness at the right time. When you can't continue, they assist you. But what about home? And all the advice I heard was about, okay, make sure you have an app, for example, that you can use use a Calm app or Headspace, or maybe make sure you have a mindfulness space in your house. But again, people's circumstances are different. This is where we'll have to think about the fact that mindfulness has an equity issue, the way we've been talking about it. It might be easy for one subgroup of people to have access to an app and meditate, for example, or a quiet space in their room, in their home. But what about the family and the kids who can't have the silence? Then I wonder, does that mean that nothing can be done? And of course, I figured I have to do something about it. So I decided I'm going to start making videos so I can share with people, students, teachers, and anybody out there, and they can hopefully follow me on a journey as one step to still having mindfulness at home, even though their teachers were no longer with them. So we're going to watch one or two of those throughout this presentation as an example, because I'm hoping you guys can do the same thing. Now, as I was thinking about COVID-19, I remember that our brain is actually very interesting. And the small little part of our brain, that's the oldest part of our brain, which is in charge of our feelings and our emotions, our amygdala, you've heard that one before, is one that is usually very useful in the sense that it is there to protect us against danger. But the problem is that that part of the brain does not differentiate between a perceived danger and a real danger. So any break in your routine is enough for that part of your brain to feel as if you're being attacked. And so it takes over your brain and you can no longer think, and it's a little difficult to be productive. So when you look at the image on the slide, just the simple fact that computers, technology, Zoom, Google Classroom, all those things replaced the regular routines that the kids were used to. And all of a sudden, things were no longer normal. You didn't get up at the same time, wear the same uniform to go to school. The kids' brains actually perceive that change in routine, that break of the cycle, as they would perceive a tiger that wants to eat them. And this is quite literal because, again, your amygdala isn't thinking, okay, this is the type of danger that's just making me uncomfortable now, but I'm not really threatened. I'm not really at risk. And this is a serious danger. No, it thinks, danger. I can't think, I'm emotional, I have to react. What can I do right now? And you start fighting, right? You've heard the 3S before, fight, flight, or freeze. What might that look like for a kid with COVID? You notice as a teacher, for example, that maybe the kids were always active in class and communicating and sharing comfortably. All of a sudden, with virtual learning, ghost, they don't participate anymore. Or kids were always productive. I talked to some kids who just told me, I don't have the motivation. I know it's not hard. There's less work than before, but I'm not able to do it. All those responses are coming from your emotional brain, your amygdala feeling as if the routine being broken is the same as a tiger. And this is when the non-judgmental aspect, the non-judgment part of mindfulness has to come through. So as an educator, it might be simple for you to figure out, look, all that has changed is that you have to stay at home, but you have a computer. So let's just keep going. You can't do that. You have to be non-judgmental because you don't understand how their brain was affected by those changes. Same is true for all the adults. Most adults who were working with kids before, in fact, anybody who was working in an office and had to break that routine and stay home, I guarantee your amygdala went through something similar at some point and was mourning the routine. And the hardest part for me was not knowing when the end was. There was no end in sight, and there still is no end in sight. So that's why I had to work on the not just being here and now, but also on the non-judgmental aspect of mindfulness, because the tiger might be perceived, but it feels as real as ever. So the strategies that we can implement, there are several of them. The first one that I decided to do was making videos, sharing tips with kids and with adults. But before we do that, I actually want us to watch a video where we talk about the brain and the fact that your brain has two different sections, one that thinks and one that feels. And when those two parts of the brain communicate, they don't always agree with each other. That might explain to you why earlier I talked about me knowing that the cupcake is not healthy, but still going for it. Once you watch that video, we're going to come back and continue with these other tips. It'll bring some insight. So let's put up the video, the first one. It's the one before that, not this one. Let's see, this is the second video before that. Okay, so there's no video before this? Yes, that first one. So let's watch the non-judgment video. Welcome to our second series, which is focused on how to make difficult decisions under stress. So today is part one, and it is focused on two things. One, you're going to learn that your brain actually has a rational center and an irrational or stress center. And then two, you will learn that those two parts of your brain talk to each other and they don't always agree. Okay, one. So the rational part of your brain is your prefrontal cortex. You've heard about it. It's a part of your brain in charge of your higher order thinking, of making good decisions, controlling impulsivity, and also your moral compass. So this is the one you want to activate when you are a student in class, an adult or a teenager in an interview, or if you're solving a difficult problem, or if you want to make a difficult decision. This is the stress, because that's how you think. Now, what's interesting about this part of your brain, though, is that it is actually the last one to evolve. And it's only fully developed when you are about 25 years old. So be kind to yourself if it's harder to be rational. So that's one. And then two, the stress center of your brain is your amygdala, in charge of your emotions. And the reason why it stresses is because it doesn't really understand what comes from the outside. It's the danger that's real and the danger that's fake. Anything that comes, it just thinks danger, 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 danger. And you want to protect you away from that, as well as make you comfortable. So we have the part that wants you to be super comfortable and safe. Everything is a danger. And the part that thinks, that rationalizes, that explains. So let's dig a little deeper. Say, for example, you are making a plan on, let's say, dieting or exercising. Have you noticed that when you do that, sometimes you feel like you're two different people? Sometimes you're the person who wants to go exercise, and some other times you, the same person, you don't want to go at all. Or sometimes you are the person who wants to eat healthy, and sometimes you are the same person who doesn't want to eat healthy at all. So that's point number two. Those two parts of your brain talk to each other, and they don't always agree. Think about it this way. Have you ever decided, okay, starting tomorrow, I am going to be healthier. I'm going to wake up at 6:30 in the morning, and I'm going to exercise. That sounds great, right? When you're making that plan, you're using your prefrontal cortex. You're thinking, why would you want to do that? Let's rationalize. Well, I have a goal of being healthy. I have a goal of going to a party in the summer, going to a wedding, and I want to fit in my dress or into my suit. I want to look a certain way. So long term, that makes sense. So that's why I'm going to start exercising tomorrow at 6:30 in the morning. So you go to bed and you wake up in the morning, and at 6:15, your brain wants nothing to do with that plan at all because you're comfortable, and your emotional brain, your amygdala, just wants you to be comfortable. And in fact, you perceive that the alarm clock is a danger. Going to the gym is a danger. Being healthy is a danger. Even though you're the same person who earlier that last night were making all these plans. So these two parts of your brain have different functions, and it's important for you to know that. Same thing, for example, with a diet. You decide with your rational brain, prefrontal cortex, I am going to be extremely healthy. I'm going to eat salad all the time and drink protein shakes, etc., etc. And when you're making that plan, that's your thinking brain. your rational center, the part you want to use to make rational decisions under stress. You make the plan. I am not going to eat cupcakes anymore, right? Because you know you like cupcakes, but they're not good for you. For some reason, though, the next day, when you pass by the cupcake shop and you see all the beautiful cupcakes and they look pink, this coconut on top, and something is just telling you, just go eat the cupcake, go get it. That's your emotional brain, because again, it just wants to protect you away from danger and keep you comfortable. And cupcake is comfort food. So the reason why I start with that step is that I want you to understand that those two parts of your brain are important. They each play different roles that need to be played for you to be alive and succeed. However, since they don't always agree, sometimes people feel like there's something wrong with them. So I'm here to say that if you often make decisions that are important for you, and then you struggle to stick to those decisions, and you realize that your brain is talking to each other, to itself, and it disagrees with each other, don't worry. There's nothing wrong with you. All that means is that you're normal. So that's step one. Before we can talk about making rational decisions under stress, we have to understand that we have a rational center in our brain and a stress center in our brain, and they don't always agree. So on next lesson, we're all going to practice exactly how to talk to them and make sure they agree when it matters. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions. Talk to you next time. Yo. So the reason why I wanted to play that video is that last point that I made about your normal is extremely important. Just because you are the same person who's making the plans and the same person who is struggling to stick to the plans doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means you're normal. The same way, just because you're somebody who before COVID used to always be productive and you were a perfectionist and everything was always under control, and now you struggle with that, doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Again, mindfulness is non-judgmental. And if you can understand this for you from your perspective, from your vantage point, then when you think about kids, you have to do the same thing. Just because the kid was always jovial and happy and participating in class before COVID, and now they can't, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong at all. In fact, remember I said that your thinking brain is not fully complete until you are 25 years old. So don't be judgmental towards yourself or towards others. So on this slide then with mindfulness strategies, as you can see, the first thing there is making videos. And that's why I made the videos myself, because I figured, what is the best way for me to actually get into people's home and share with them what I can do, I can provide from the comfort of my home as well. As long as you have internet connection and you can have access to video, at least a video like that one could be helpful. So I recommend that teachers take the time to think about some activities they can have. It can also be audio, and share that with the kids so they can use at home. That's one tip. Another tip would be to have a mindful corner at home. And this idea comes from the fact that when you design a mindful classroom, you want to make sure you have a mindful corner, right? So this is the one where I would have my glitter jar, for example, or my Hoberman sphere, right? And also my chime. But these are just a few things you could have there. And when I have a corner like that in my classroom, I teach the kids that that's the place where you go to recharge. Because sometimes you feel like your cell phone with low battery, and the way to charge it is not to try and do complicated math problems or to read complex texts. It is often to just go be mindful, whether it be through mindful sensing, smelling, or mindful listening with sound, or mindful breathing. Now, when you're at home, though, it's difficult to create this. That's why I talk about equity. It is not very helpful to assume that every kid can have access to all these tools. So teach them on how to create a mindful corner with the simplest things possible. What could that look like? Think about your favorite chair in the house. Okay, you have a favorite chair. Once you have that, Do you have a favorite blanket, for example, or a teddy bear? I don't know. Think about a picture that makes you very, very happy and put that picture next to that chair. So you have your favorite chair, you have your favorite blanket, for example, or sweater or teddy bear, and you have a few pictures next to that chair that make you happy. That's it. Once you have something like that, your brain has learned that when I'm in that physical space, my physiological reaction and response is in sync with my emotional one. And so I can feel more mindful. Another idea would be to practice mindful listening with sounds. This could be as simple as this, right? Because again, we do mindful listening with chimes and other things, but you cannot assume that everybody has a chime at home. This is a pretty simple exercise. Teach kids how to take 30 seconds per day, for example, to close their eyes and count all the sounds that they can hear in the room. As simple as that. Just count them. How many sounds from the AC to perhaps the wind or a car that's driving by outside. Just count those sounds and write that down. The next day, do the same thing and see if you can count more sounds or fewer sounds. And what that does is it's really interesting, right? So what it does is it forces your brain to focus on one thing. When you have a task, the task being count the sounds, your brain has no other option but to forget about all distractions and to try to accomplish the tasks. That's why this works, because you might assume, well, shouldn't I try to quiet my mind? Well, that's very difficult. In fact, I don't know anybody who's able to have a completely quiet and empty mind, like ever, right? Even when you're sleeping. So this is a simple one. And the more the kids do that, the more they will notice that there are sounds around them that they haven't paid attention to in general, that they had tuned out. And the more they do it, the more their brain changes through neuroplasticity, because again, it's like bicep curls. The more you use the biceps, the stronger it becomes. The more you use the neurons to focus on counting the sound, the better you become a mindful listener, not just for the sounds, but also for conversations, but also for lessons, etc., etc. That's a really, really cool tip. And then something else you can do is, let's see here. So coloring is an interesting one. I was kind of leaning into to look at the slide. So coloring is really interesting for kids and for adults, because I've noticed just with people that I talk to that coloring books for adults have made some sort of comeback that I can only explain by saying that we are becoming more and more mindful as a collective people. And sometimes without thinking about mindfulness, you just know that if you can go sit somewhere comfortable and color, you're going to feel better. So that's why it's something you can try as well. And with those different examples, I'm hoping I'm giving you thoughts so you can then think about ways to personalize these understandings and then come up with your own examples. But I also made a video where I demonstrated a few strategies for mindful breathing. So that's the next video that we're going to watch. I want to make a video about mindful breathing because that's the tool I've been using myself, because lately I've been needing to go back and focus on being mindful myself when I'm dealing with stress. So typically all I do is I just take 2 to 3 minutes and I just focus on heading through my belly, so this way. Exhaling through my mouth. And the reason why heading through the belly makes more sense because we get more oxygen in this way than from the chest, for example. So this with the belly is deeper than this. So this is short. This is long. So I do that for 2 to 3 minutes and it's really, really helpful. What I try to do is I think about, if I inhale for, let's say 3 seconds, for example, I try to exhale for 6 seconds. So if that was 3, I go 6. So So in 3, out 6. In 3, out 6. It's a little difficult when you start, so maybe you go in 2 and then out 4. So this is super simple. Just give it a shot. Take 1 minute, 2, 3 minutes, and see if that helps. I have other tools that I use for, let's say, mindful listening. If I'm focusing on breathing and I have time, I want to use it. I want to make a video about mindful breathing because that's the tool I've been using myself, because lately I've been needing to go back and focus on being mindful myself when I'm dealing with stress. So typically what I do is I just take 2 to 3 minutes and I just focus on inhaling through my belly, so this way. Exhaling through my mouth. And the reason why inhaling through the belly makes more sense is because you get more oxygen in this way than from the chest, for example. So this with the belly is deeper than this. So this is short. This is long. So I do that for 2 to 3 minutes, and it's really, really helpful. What I try to do is I think about, if I inhale for, let's say, 3 seconds, for example, I try to exhale for 6 seconds. So if that was 3, I go 6. So in 3, out 6. In 3, out 6. It's a little difficult when you start, so maybe you go in 2 and then out 4. So this is super simple. Just give it a shot. Take 1 minute, 2, 3 minutes, and see if that helps. I have other tools that I use for, let's say, mindful listening. If I'm focusing on breathing and I have the time, I want to use it. That's really, really helpful while I'm doing the mindful breathing as well. Or, of course, you've all seen these. You just shake that and just stare at the glitter as it settles. So if you use this, I think it's really cool to just think about this as a timer. So at the same time as you are breathing in and out, and you focus on this, shake it, and then start your mindful breathing exercise and stop when the glitter is completely settled. So I'm going to give it a shot. See, that's really cool. I'm not sure how long that took, but that's enough for me to go from to that calm. So give it a shot. I hope that helps. Thank you. All right. So thank you for sharing that video. So it's one that I made when I felt that I had just used those tools. And so I wanted to share them. And I try to give a few examples just to show you that you can think outside of the box and get into your kids' living rooms through a video. Let's close this out then with the very idea of distance learning. I've been thinking about this for a really, really long time because it's not a new wave. For many years now, there's been a movement that I appreciate in education away from the teacher being the master of all knowledge, like the holder of everything that a kid needs to know, who then dumps that on the kid who's looking down from up and absorbs that. and can only come back when they need more so the master can give. That doesn't really work. We've walked away from that. And we are moving more into an environment where there's collaboration and there's inquiry and there's exploration, because adults have hope. I mean, I hope so. I figured out that they cannot have all the answers. You don't have all the answers if you're an adult. You don't. I hope you know that. So kids having access to technology, you should appreciate that and allow them to just kind of go and think on their own. So how do you then empower kids to learn? And the word that has always come is intrinsic. The kid is not intrinsically motivated. And it's hard to teach that. But after some work and kind of reading and getting exposed to people who had interesting thoughts about the topic, I found about this ABC that I want to talk about. So intrinsic mindfulness is the goal. When I was teaching, I always thought the best day of my life as a teacher would be a day that would go like this. I can't come to school because I'm sick, for example. And the sub who was supposed to come to school is late. And as the sub walks to class, the sub notices that all my kids are there and they know exactly what they're supposed to do and they're doing it without anybody watching them. That's the dream. So when it comes to mindfulness, what is intrinsic mindfulness? What kind of mindfulness can the kids have that would allow them to be at home without the teacher or the parent watching them? That's why you have the ABC. So in order to create anything intrinsic, in this case, mindfulness, we need A, B, and C. A is autonomy, B, belonging, and C, competency. Let's talk about autonomy. Before I get into mindfulness, I'm going to use an example that's a little more comfortable, a little more familiar with everybody. Let's say that you have a son who plays football, right? In order for them to actually be their best and perform their best on the football team, they need to feel a sense of autonomy. There needs to be a little bit of, I went to try out because I wanted to. Even if it's not 1,000%, they need to have a little bit of that, because if it's just pushed and forced, the coach will tell you, they can tell that it wasn't authentic. So create a sense of autonomy. Let's stick to football. B, a sense of belonging. Once your son gets into the football team, he needs to feel like he's part of a crew, part of a group, part of a family, part of a tribe. You have your own codes, your own language, we have each other's back. Belonging that way makes you feel safe, and you can try and make mistakes and learn through those mistakes without worrying about the judgment, because you're part of the tribe. And then C, competency. You have to know how to actually play football, right? Because if you had autonomy in joining the team, you feel a sense of belonging, but your coach hasn't taught you any of the plays or the skills, you aren't going to be able to be successful. Let's use those three, the A, B, and the C, for the classroom. In a classroom environment, if you're teaching math, for example, and I use math because it's the toughest one, at least for me, right? You need to find a way to create some sense of autonomy in the kid. Like, they need to believe that somehow there's something in it for them. And by learning these math concepts, their life somehow is going to be better because of that. And so they're choosing to learn. Again, should it be 1,000%? No, but there needs to be some buy-in. How do you make that kid feel like there's so much value in this that you're teaching that they are somewhat autonomous and choosing to learn the math with you? That's A. B, belonging. You need to have a classroom environment where all the kids, every single kid in your classroom, feels like they are part of a group, a crew, a family, a tribe. It doesn't matter how and why they got there, they're there now. Find a way to make them belong, because I've talked to kids, right? And the kids who don't feel like they belong, they're a little bit of an outsider, they're not going to give it their all. So create that community in the class. And then C, competency, teach them how to do the actual math, right? So, because if you feel like you chose to want to learn these concepts and you feel a sense of belonging, but you don't know how to do math, I mean, that'd be a little difficult. So let's go to mindfulness now. First thing first, autonomy. Find a way to teach the kids that mindfulness is actually good for them. It can be something as simple as, oh, did you see how when you counted from 10 to 1 and you were breathing, how you felt better or you felt calmer? If you want to feel that way often, you have to do it often. Find a way to get some sort of buy-in so they feel a sense of autonomy, especially again, because they're going to be at home. But once they have that, B, belonging. And this one is interesting, and that's where I talk about equity. I think for a really, really long time, mindfulness was kind of positioned as this thing that belonged to only one group of people, right? Maybe a certain socioeconomic class. But it's not true. Like mindfulness, for anybody who's a human being can benefit from mindfulness. This is for everybody. So make the kids understand you're no different than those other people who seem to enjoy the benefits of mindfulness. You can enjoy them too. You're part of the mindful crew. Find a way to make that happen. And then C, competency. Teach them those tools. Use some of the examples that I gave today. Maybe teach them how to create a mindful corner at home. Teach them the strategies of the breathing. Don't breathe shallow with your chest, breathe with your belly. If you want to focus on mindful listening, perhaps close your eyes and count the sound. Like teach them those things. They need to know how to do it before they can feel they can do it comfortably. But you need all three, right? You can't just have some autonomy, but have no belonging. And you can't have autonomy and belonging and have no competency. You need all three. I happen to think that that order makes sense, but it doesn't matter what the order is. You got to find one way to make it happen like this. So I'm closing out then by sharing that now that we're all working from home and the kids are learning away, we don't know how things are going to be transformed. Again, I think there was already a movement towards distance learning. We were embracing more and more the fact that learning through a computer is not inferior to learning in person all the time. I still think that some things are better taught in person, but learning online is not inferior, right? But we were precipitated into a world where we all have to do it, and we don't know for how long. So these practices are extremely important for everybody. Everybody needs mindfulness somehow. And what I mean by that is no matter how calm and zen and fulfilled and in charge of your feelings you believe you are, you can always be a little better. I don't know anybody who says, you know what, I'm so zen and content and happy all the time that I don't need any more of that. Most people I know could use some. So if you're here and you think you're in the worst position, there's always somebody worse. And if you're here, you think you're in the best, there's always somebody better. So that means that anybody anywhere could always get more and more and more and more and more. And that's going to lead to you having a more fulfilled life. So these things I share with the kids in mind, but it starts with the adults. So I hope that these practices make sense for you as an adult and you can bring them to the kids. Thank you. I'm ready for some Q&A.
Thank you, Dido.
Of course.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much for inspiring us and enlightening us with so many great tips. I had my own notebook here, and I was taking a lot of notes with regards to how we as adults can inspire those around us, and how can we also inspire all of those in our school community. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. With regards to some of the things that you said, just really some things really stick to me at this moment, which is that recharging station in your classroom or in your learning space or in your office or in your home, right? So no matter where you are, just thinking about that space of recharging. And what would that space look like? Which it could actually be anything that you can possibly want it to be, right? It doesn't, there's no special formula from what you said, as long as you have things that are meaningful to you and you don't have to have all the fancy objects, right? That some people sometimes get so attached to, and they're like, well, I can't create this in my home because I don't have these objects. The other thing that really stood out to me is the fact that you talked about equity, and how making this recharging station and having this mindfulness corner, it's all about what's right for you and what makes sense for your family. And you don't have to spend any more money, or you don't have to go out and buy anything new, because it's just made up of things that are meaningful to you. And if you actually went out and bought things, they wouldn't be meaningful. So, that really stuck to me as well. And then the two other words that really resonated with the Scala concept and with a lot of the things that we do are the words that represent, you mentioned community and autonomy. And you really emphasize that spirit of community, which is so important for us to build no matter what, and the spirit of autonomy. And how can we build, develop, and create autonomous learners, autonomous adults in the virtual environments that we participate in and in the lives that we live. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And with that, I have some questions that have come up for you. And I promise that we won't keep you here forever, because we could absolutely keep talking to you until tomorrow. That would be easy for us. But one of the questions that came up, and Catherine is the person who's asking this question, is what role does emotional intelligence play in the relationship with the family, with colleagues, and with the school during the pandemic? And when we come back to school, what emotional intelligence skills will be vital so that we can relearn how to face everyday life?
That's a really good question. And the simplest way for me to answer this is to say emotional intelligence matters a lot more than most of us in education has made it seem, intentionally or unintentionally. Because the typical kind of cognitive intelligence that we tend to value, when you compare that to the emotional intelligence, if you don't have a kid who feels safe emotionally in your classroom, if you don't have a kid who knows how to actually regulate those emotions, if you don't have a kid who can look at somebody's eyes and actually emotionally understand that, oh, that look means that my classmate is sad or my teacher is having a bad day. If you can't understand those things, it's extremely difficult to get past that and somehow learn how to do math or how to analyze a complex quote from literature. So that's in general, right? So now that we are learning away, it's even more important because at least there's some familiarity in the classroom, and your physical environment plays a strong role in your emotional state, right? So perhaps the kids had already learned how to be and how to feel in class, but that routine has been broken again. So now that they're home, it's even more important for them to learn how to get in touch with their emotional intelligence. And the way I think about it is everybody has an emotional profile. And I think we should all learn our profiles because it starts with you, the adult, and go with the kids. Your profile might look like, look, for me, when it's quiet, I'm good. Any noise doesn't work for me. And when I feel triggered, I know that my hands becomes a little kind of sweaty and I start to stutter, and the people around me could be talking to me. It doesn't matter what they say. I don't feel comfortable. That's part of my profile. When I'm aware of that, then I don't judge that, non-judgmental, then I can start doing the work. So it's extremely important to remain focused on emotional intelligence. And that's from the kids, the kid in the classroom, the teachers in the school community, and at home. It's all the same. And the reason why it's so important right now is because the truth is you have no idea when things are going to go back to normal. You have no clue what normal would look like, would feel like. You have no idea. So all you can control is how you deal with your own emotional intelligence. And if you do that, and your family members get some of that, and your coworkers get some of that, by the time you get back to school, no matter what, you're better prepared to deal with the new normal, to adapt the new learning standards than you would have if you had not focused on becoming a little more emotionally intelligent.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sometimes in our busy lives, we never really stop to understand that this is all about practice, right? It's about practicing these habits. It's about practicing mindfulness. It's about practicing what this means. And once we practice it, we're going to start incorporating it into our lives. And then we're going to be able to also inspire those around us to practice the same behaviors. And pretty soon we'll have a culture of mindfulness that is then created by the practice and habits that have been developed. So, very, very insightful, because it's just not going to, the culture is not going to happen overnight if we don't practice the culture. right? And really connecting to that last question and to your last words, we have a question from the Salvador team, and they mention, how do we develop the regulation of emotions from the practice of mindfulness, especially when you are in physical isolation? You touched on this during your talk. How do we regulate? Like, if you were to say, Priscilla, in one quick sentence, this is how you would practice this regulation of emotions, what would that be?
So that would not be done in one sentence because it is an infinite game that we're playing, right? I could give you a quick sentence, but that might work for you, Priscilla, but that might not work for Rachel or for Roger or for Dido, right? So that's why I'm going to go a little deeper. So I'm with you, but let's go a little deeper. So you need to develop an emotional emergency plan for yourself, right? And I talk about this because I've always been fascinated by the kind of the concept of practicing for fire and practicing for an earthquake and for a hurricane. We do all those things, and so we're prepared when those things happen. We don't do the same thing with our feelings. We know for a fact that we will need to regulate our emotions every single day. So if we know that we might have a hurricane once a year or twice a year, and we practice the drill, the same thing should happen about emotional regulation. So the first step is still about your profile, because you have to understand kind of who you are, what triggers you. And the second step, once you know what triggers you, is you got to understand, how do you deal with that stress? Because some people they cry, and after they cry, they feel better. Some people get upset. Some get angry. Some want to go work out. Some want to eat chocolate. I don't know. Like, you got to figure out what it is for you, but you have to be honest with yourself, right? Don't tell me, when I get upset, I typically reflect, and the next day I go and talk to my friends, and then I ask your friend, she's like, nah, she's not like that. So be honest, okay? So determine how you deal with that. And then you have to do some analysis of what that way of dealing with the emotions is. Is that healthy? And when I say healthy, it's healthy according to you, right? So if you realize that the way to do it is for you to just always run and run so hard until you can no longer feel your legs, is that really healthy according to you? If it's eating chocolate just because you feel upset, does that really work for you? And if it doesn't, all we have to do is start practicing different things. For example, I can guarantee that by the end of the day tomorrow, something will trigger me and I'm going to be upset. Facts, I know that. Okay. Second thing, knowing my profile, I know that what I'm going to be tempted to do is to scream or run. Facts, I know that. So what I'm going to do is, when I feel myself get upset and I'm about to run or scream, I am going to scream out loud, I am so happy, and smile. As simple as that. It's that simple, but you do that and you do that and you start rewiring your brain to the point that you actually become somebody who no longer has to think about the technique, you just do it. But the key here is to plan this before the emergency. Like, nobody practices the fire drill during the fire. That doesn't make any sense. So you plan when things are okay. And I shared with the teachers yesterday, for example, use music, leverage music. Maybe make a list of 10 songs, your 10 happiest songs. You can find them, have them ready. Again, make this when you're feeling good. That way you can easily reach out to it. Maybe a list of comedies, funny movies that you enjoy. Or practice perhaps putting your cell phone and technology away, going for a walk. So plan all those things when you're calm, have them handy, learn your profile, and then practice and practice and practice until you figure out which one works for you.
Yeah, that is really interesting, because yesterday, some of us had the pleasure and honor to have you with us in an exclusive live for the Escala Concept educators. And during that live, during our professional development, you actually mentioned the whole idea of making that happy playlist. And right after that live, we were able to collect a series of songs. And we have now created the Escala Concept Happy Playlist that we're going to be sharing with our faculty tomorrow. So we need to thank Patricia from Salvador for putting that together for us. But we now have that everyone can go to. And not to say that that's going to be everybody's go-to list, but at least everyone has a starting point, and everyone has something that they can attach themselves to in order to cope with the difficult times, and with the angry times, and with the upset times, and with the sad times, and with the anxious times, and everything that we know is already going to happen. As you said, between now and tomorrow night, I am going to get upset. So if I already know that, and I already know what all my responses are going to be, how can I then deal with them? So that was brilliant, Dido. So thank you for the tips today. And thank you for the tips yesterday, because we've already gotten on it, and we're already creating we've already created our happy list. So to close off our questions, we have one more question that came from Salvador as well. And this question has to do with teenage development. So really knowing well that our young teenagers are isolated and in their homes, and they're missing the emotional and social parts of their lives right now. How will that experience affect them emotionally and socially as they become older? How do you think this is going to impact them in the future?
So that's interesting. It's hard to tell, but what I know is that the piece that's the most important for the adults around them to be aware of, for themselves, the adults and for the kids, is the non-judgment piece, right? Because I talked to many teenagers who again were telling me, you know what, I don't really know how I feel about this situation. I'm not able to see my friends in person physically. I'm not able to see my teachers. And again, I don't feel motivated. I'm not sure what a productive day looks like anymore. And I just feel down. And the biggest thing that they took away from us talking was the idea of that's okay. That's okay. Because what does normal really mean, to be honest, right? We call normal what we did long enough that our bodies got adjusted to it. So really, the way we live now is the way some people have been living for a long time. In fact, I have some friends who have not noticed that there's anything different, because their lifestyle was already conducive to mostly being home, working remotely, ordering everything online. So there's this idea that things are normal and abnormal, but all that has to do with is what we're used to. So as somebody who has family in like 3 different continents in different circumstances, I know that the current circumstances are bad, but they're not that bad. So don't judge yourself. That's the biggest thing. And remember that your brain is an awesome machine. It just wants to kind of scan the world for all the patterns, and then it gets used to it. Like your brain is more wonderful than you think. So don't think that your brain is going to be impacted in a negative way, because this is normal at this point. And then the other normal will be the normal when it is normal. So I would think about it that way and focus on the non-judgment piece. And again, I think that all this did is accelerate a path on which we already were, because leveraging technology to teach and to learn and to be mindful and to help other people, we were already going there. We're just do it now. And the last thing I would say about that is that teach kids the importance of service to others, right? Self-care is also care for others. So that's why random acts of kindness are so powerful. Doing something good to somebody else, and then you see them enjoy what you did for them, makes you happy. So it's double win. And that's your biology reminding you that being kind to other people is very powerful. And since you're at home, again, don't think complicated. Don't think I'm going to have a project where I'm going to rally everybody around the neighborhood. We're going to do a drive to get books. No, start with your siblings. Say something nice to your mom tomorrow. Say something nice to your brother or to your dad, or you know that mom likes this, do it for her. So these are very simple things that when you teach that to kids, it's all about perspective. Within your home, the same way you can find a mindful corner in there without having to purchase anything, you can do something for somebody else without having to leave your house, and you get the reward for that as well. But again, please don't judge yourself. Like, this is okay. We're going to be fine.
That is a great message to end with, because absolutely, I think so. Sometimes we all put so much pressure on ourselves. We all want to put so much pressure on ourselves to be happy all the time, or to be able to be there for someone else, or to be able to experience life around us and be grateful for it, but then sometimes we just don't feel it, and we continue to put on that pressure that we have to feel great. And by hearing you say this, I think it's so reassuring for so many other people, because again, coming from an outside source that has studied mindfulness and that has spent a lot of time studying the neuroscience behind it, and the neural connections that happen when we are mindful, I think makes a ton of a difference. So Dido, thank you for bringing these comforting words in times of distress. And again, I think that to complement what you just mentioned, I think that the teenagers that have gone through the series of things that they have gone through now, they're also going to be more resilient, right? They're going to understand what the true meaning of empathy is, because they'll understand what it is to put themselves in other people's shoes. As you mentioned, when you're doing these acts of service or the random acts of kindness, you are learning empathy. You are practicing gratitude. So I think that is so, so powerful. Again, connecting to what you mentioned. And one last connection that I'll leave everybody with is the idea that one of the things that we did at Concept right when the pandemic began was we put together the Golden Wings Project, where it is exactly what you just mentioned, where you actually take care of somebody in your community and you just do the random acts of kindness for that person. Be it sending them a playlist so that you can brighten up their day, sending them a poem, sending them just a quote of the day, sending them a picture that inspires you, but just keeping an eye on that person so that person knows that there's someone there for them, and that there's someone there that's going to bring that random act of kindness, during the day or during the week. So Dido, once again, thank you. It was a pleasure having you visit our schools. We had you on our 3 campi not too long ago, and it was such a pleasure to welcome you in São Paulo, to welcome you in Salvador, to welcome you in Ribeirão Preto, and now to welcome you live from your home. So we feel like we can learn a little bit more about you in the comfort of your home with the maps and all the pictures that we see in the background. And we hope to welcome you very soon again to Brazil, as soon as all these travel barriers have left us, so that you can enjoy more time with us and that we can be more inspired by you. So thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we will expect to see all of you in our next In.MIND series talk that will happen next week on Thursday at 5 p.m. with Ewan McIntosh, the CEO of Notosh, which is a design thinking company based off of the UK with offices in New York, in Australia, and in some other parts around the globe, always pushing schools to think differently. And tomorrow we have our morning bites as well at 10 a.m. live in our Escola Concept YouTube channel. And Adriana Ramos will be talking to all of us. What does it mean to coexist in the same home, in the same space, in times of COVID with teenagers, parents, and other family members? So with that, we thank everybody for joining us today. And we thank Dido once again for taking the time and being with us. Thank you so much. Thank you.